Good morning. One of the major factors in any performance genre is the use of time. Artists have a particular temporal perception when working alone or with collaborators within their own medium. However, the sense of the time as an artistic device may alter significantly when the art genres are cross-disciplinarily blended and artists from various media work simultaneously on the same material in an experimental setting. Furthermore, the use of the gestures in the context of spatial decisions serves as a means of exchange between the performers. That can in turn affect interpersonal decision-making in collaborative multimedial interpretation. My name is Elina Akselrud, and the focus of this presentation is the non-verbal artistic communication that occurs between two performers during art making, and how can the actions of one duo partner from a certain artistic discipline influence the decisions of the other one in another discipline, respectively. To illustrate my arguments, I will shortly present excerpts from my case study documentary, Vers le mystère, Towards the Mystery, which is an interlacing of contemporary dance improvisation with the music of Alexander Scriabin. The entire case study is a feature-length cinematic work consisting of the three aspects: the piano and dance performance, the process of creating experimentation during the research sessions, and the discussion of the development of the intersubjective communication between the artists, as well as the research outputs of the case study. Before I move on to highlighting the details, I would like to mention that I chose to work on the music by Alexander Scriabin due to two main reasons. The first one being the multimedial richness of his work. This composer incorporated into his compositions an expanding set of genres that involve sensations beyond the oral, such as light, color, movement, scent, and touch. Moreover, by means of combining multiple artistic elements, he intended to eventually transcend the realm of human emotion and reach pure ecstasy. The second reason being the lack of temporal subtlety and understanding of his rubato by many pianists in general. I argue that intermedial interpretation of his works has an ability to offer an alternative angle of perceiving and performing his music with a more profound understanding and artistic depth. Now, returning to the case study. The repertoire of the project encompasses a set of piano pieces by Alexander Scriabin from the middle and late periods of his legacy. Particularly, I made the decision to concentrate on his miniatures with program titles such as Fragilité, Danse languide, Énigme, Désir, Caresse dansée, Guirlande, Flamme sombre, The Dark Flames, Vers la flamme, Towards the Flame, among others. The pieces are intertwined with contemporary dance improvisation while being performed by me. My collaborator, the dancer Leia Orosz, and I discuss possibilities brought by the in-betweenness, the layers of the communication that are frequently transient, barely definable, and oftentimes imperceptible, unless paid special attention to. Particularly, these are the sense of the flow, movement, and structure of the work, the role of the space, it is the physical distance between performers, and its relation to the use of the time, the density of the content, it is musical material in a cross-disciplinary context, and the gestural communication between us that evolved from being a spontaneous reaction to each other's temporal decisions into a means of intersubjective contact that to a large extent defined the interpersonal interpretation of the given works. Each of these miniatures represents a transient character that is very unique and poignant. With the help of a cross-disciplinary exchange, and due to the sharpening of the human senses in such a setting, artistic intake can be manifested in ways that create a profound impact for both the audience as well as for the performers themselves. Allowing for openness creates an opportunity for the aesthetic of chance. Acknowledging this aesthetic and giving it space lets the work thrive and transform itself due to the freedom the performer has, even in the context of working with a classical solo piece while in an expanded crossover setting. This approach leads to limitless possibilities of creating a cross-disciplinary dialogue, namely a true synthesis of the arts, which was the biggest lifelong aspiration of Alexander Scriabin. Among the research objectives of my work, I would like to bring out the following points. Dissecting the process of interpersonal decision-making in collaborative multimedial interpretation. Challenging my own artistic practice by putting it into unpredictable conditions. Establishing the means to communicate without direct communication with the dancer by the look, gesture, listening to the movement noise, or without using any sensory triggers at all. Developing strategies of achieving a cross-disciplinary artistic dialogue. Exploring how it may affect the musician's, pianist's interpretation in particular. And observing how can a relation or a counterpoint between the senses bring mutual enrichment through collaborative work in different modalities. My hypothesis is that when combined together, multiple artistic media create a profound context for interpreting a musical work by allowing for the synesthetic multisensory perception to affect the interpretation. The responsiveness of each artist aids in creating a unique intersubjective system of transcribing particular musical devices into the movement, which in turn allows to pass the material between the collaborators and return it with a gesture to respond to. Thus, the interpretation becomes extensively interpersonal and profoundly enriched by the density of the artistic content. Henceforth, the musical score serves as a medium to base the concept upon. However, the system that was unfolded and developed in the process can now be regarded as a means of communication in a sense, making it possible to interchangeably articulate the material through the combination of artistic disciplines. Now I would like to proceed with my methodology. I have used the qualitative research method, particularly concentrating on the means of experimentation, discussion, and analyzing the multisensorial feedback of both of us. Among the aspects of my methodology are the stimulated recall. My collaborator and I have viewed the recorded tryout videos between the sessions, analyzed the material, and placed the phenomena into the following 4 categories. A. What made an impact that we would want to repeat or develop, either useful or positive? B. What made no impact, or made an impact that we could not and would not want to proceed with, either useless or negative? C. Any other points that caught our attention but have neither useful nor useless impact on the process? And D. Discussing the sensations each of us experienced during the tryouts. We have established an agreement to allow for the artistic encounter in various forms of intermediate interaction that could only take place as a result of openness, readiness, acceptance of each other's interpretational decisions, as well as of the unexpected and unpredictable. I have used the software Sonic lineup from the Sonic Visualizer to visually compare the recording tracks of my solo performance versus a cross-disciplinary performance of the given pieces. My collaborator and I discussed main ideas, characters, and messages of the pieces based on the historical sources, i.e. Scriabin's own remarks or those of his contemporaries, as well as our own perception of the musical imagery. We have observed and dissected our decisions that took place during the performance. What was in my control or initiative versus her control or initiative versus made jointly, whether it was conscious or pure serendipity, and which changes of the environment it has elicited. We analyzed what happened deliberately or spontaneously, and whether it has established security in our own judgment and interpretation. I have prepared a questionnaire for both of us. We have then responded to the questions and filmed our live conversation, in which we elaborated on our answers after the research sessions were concluded. This has helped us to sum up the process, the progress, the results, and our impressions of the case study relating specifically to the intersubjective decision-making. We explored two categories of notions: the shared notions, ideas, bodily expressions and gestures, momentum, and spatial experience that we had in common or perceived similarly. And of course, the opposite notions, such as some perceptions and imagery, with willingness to examine both of the opposite intakes from each other and elaborate whether and how each of them could affect the research process. For example, in one piece, Leia's perception of the character influenced my view and feeling of the piece, while in another one it had rather puzzled me, and we made a point to continue elaborating on the imagery of that particular piece in our future work, perhaps in 2 days when we present the project here, live. Among the details of the case study, I would like to highlight several brightest points with examples for the majority of these. The perception of the time for me as a musician expands through the work in different modalities, through the increased density of the content when my collaborator and I are working together. I find it necessary to take more time during particular moments of the piece in order to explore and respond to what happens artistically between us. As an example, I have an excerpt from the Guirlande, Opus 73. Allowing for the aesthetic of chance and spontaneity to be part of the interpretation welcomes the unexpected, determines the how, and expands the content through the movement in order to give it a chance to unfold. Certain pieces have been extended by Leia even after the indication in the score that the piece has ended. I have the ending of the étrangeté, strangeness, from Opus 63 as an example. reconsidering the role of the space for a classical pianist. Due to working with a dancer, I realized that following her mentally and tracking her spatial presence made me able to sense the physical area differently. I was aware of the distance and the air between us, visually, audibly, and kinesthetically. And I have the désir, which is desire, from Opus 57 as an example of this. Expanding visual boundaries by activating a new aspect of my hearing in order to sense the dancer's movements audibly when I could not perceive her visually. The realization of the interplay between the rhythm and movement. They might or might not necessarily have to directly relate to each other. For example, my collaborator might make a decision to move slowly to a piece in a fast tempo and vice versa, if she senses the necessity for this in order to depict the character. Discovering the authentic synchronicity. When the rhythm, the gesture, and the character blend naturally and create an organic intermediate environment, working in which makes us both artistically and humanly content. And I have the Enigme, Opus 52, as an example. Exploration of the micro-movement in relation to the distance. When working closely, the subtle gestures influence subtle nuances of the musical interpretation and inspire to focus more attentively on the micro details of such factors as sonority, resonance, attack, takeoff, and the degree of pedaling, in addition to the entire temporal impact. I have an excerpt from Danse languide, the languid dance, from Opus 51. getting accustomed to each other's presence and the style of work. Tackling the question, how can we feel each other, even if there is distance between us? Gesture and breath as a means of communication. Deciding when to continue after a rest or a fermata. And I have two examples now. The first one is from the Mask, Opus 63. It's an excerpt representing the role of the gesture. And then it's an excerpt from our discussion about the question when to continue after a long rest or a fermata, with a short example from Flamme Sombre, the Dark Flames, from Opus 73, where there is a long rest before the very ending. When playing, I'm also thinking about the decisions, time-wise, mostly. Not only, of course, but also this idea, what is the other person thinking right now? What do you want to do with the material? And trying to figure out if it's me who is making a decision now or you are making a decision. Mm-hmm. Who gives the space to each other, because it's a constant play. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's possible to somehow track that balance at all, but there are some very unusual moments for me when, for example, in the very long rest, I deliberately did not start, because I wanted to see when is the moment for you, when do you move, and that would mean the start for me, which I have done, for example, once in that particular place, because I usually would take the lead.
I remember the feeling, and it just felt good to have time,
yeah,
and silence, and to be able to kind of just take this time to start into the new piece. And yeah, I don't know, I just enjoy silence, and I enjoy to like take the lead, but also when it's made conscious, you know, it was your conscious choice, mm-hmm. which makes it more special, because it's like, okay, I can take as long as I want, yeah. and you're gonna wait because that's what you decided.
Yeah, and I wanted to see how long you would take as an experiment.
Yeah.
Blocking pieces from different opus numbers into groups with similar characters. For example, the pieces with the languid character, Danse languide, the languid dance, Poème avec langueur, and Poème languide, and the flying pieces, the Poème ayé, the winged poem, Énigme, and Étrangeté, the strangeness. This has allowed Leia to develop a cohesive movement language that in turn has impacted my response ability on a substantially more profound level and created a genuine intermedial synthesis. Now, I would like to highlight the main conclusion points of this phase of my research. Achieving an intermediate dialogue is possible through listening, watching, sensing mutually in the environment of respect and willingness to communicate and interact professionally and personally. There are subtle but audible changes that can be perceived upon comparison of the recordings and the sensations between playing solo and working in a cross-disciplinary context. I now regard the score as a foundation that provides a choice of free expression rather than a frame that imposes constraining boundaries. I have derived a new formula for myself that the exchange plus personal imagery times each individual artist, for me, equals to going into a different headspace. As all the senses are activated at their maximum capacity due to processing much more information and responding immediately. The sense of form, for me, as a classical musician, might alter as well as the perception of the time that expands. The space is present, or else I'm present in the space, even with little to no physical movement of my own. However, perceiving the dancer, visually, audibly, and mentally, has enabled my kinesthetic sensations, due to which the physical space has now acquired a deeper meaning compared to the one it had before in my personal hierarchy of factors that impact my interpretation. Viewing the gesture as the means of communication has determined interpersonal decision-making. Through my work, I argue that artistic interpretation is enhanced when it is introduced in a cross-disciplinary setting. I claim that synesthetic multisensory perception invokes poignant effects on the interpretation when presented in multi, inter, trans, or cross-disciplinary context.